Asmat Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Parama Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarva Gurubhyo Namaha. So now we're continuing on with our discussion of Mumuksupadi by Pillai Lokacharya and with the commentary of Manavala Mahamuni. So last time we discussed different interpretations by Vedanta Deshika and Pillai Lokacharya of the Astakshara mantra, Om Namo Narayanaya, of the Dvaya mantra, Srimad Narayana Charano Sharanam Prapadye Shrimate Narayanaya Namaha, and the first line of the Krishna Charma Sloka, Sarva Dharman Parityaja Mam Ekam Sharanam. And now the next line is coming up next. Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja is what we're going to begin talking about now. So let's have a look at that. So this brings us up to the next point of difference, the interpretation of Ekam, the word Ekam, in Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja. So if we remember the whole Krishna Charma Sloka, which is in Bhagavad Gita 8, chapter 18, verse 66. The final instruction of Lord Krishna. Sarva Dharman Parityaja Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja Aham Tva Sarva Papebhyo Mokshayishyami Masuchaha. So here we're going to be discussing the meaning of the word Ekam. Now Ekam means one. One in Sanskrit. So both agree, that means both the northern school and the southern school of Sri Vaishnavism, the Wadagalai followers of Vedanta Deshika and the Tengalai followers of Pillai Lokacharya and Manavala Mahamuni, that means that Ekam has the meaning of exclusion, avadharana. Exclusion means only. Ekam means one person only, or one thing only. But how much does it exclude? In other words, Ekam means exclusion, means one to the exclusion of all others, right? Sharanam Vraja means to surrender, right? Sharanam Prapadye, Prapati. So we need to surrender to one person, to the Lord, to Sriman Narayana. But what exactly does that mean? Does it exclude all others? But how much does this exclude? Pillai Lokacharya and Manavala Mahamuni take it to exclude anything other than the Lord from being the upaya, or the means. Upaya means means. The means or the way to moksha, or liberation, in any way. So the southern school acharyas, Pillai Lokacharya and Manavala Mahamuni, the Tengalai school of Sri Vaishnavism, take it that means the Lord only the Lord. Ekam means only the Lord. When Krishna says, surrender unto me only, when he says Ekam, he means only to him. Thus, they deny that property which for them consists largely of acceptance of the Lord's protection, can be called an upaya. So the Lord himself is the upaya. The Lord is the upaya. Property is not the upaya. Property is not the means. It's the Lord actually that's the means. Sometimes we talk about property being the means. Property is an initial means. Just like we were discussing when we were reading Srivachana Bhushana, which is another book by Pillai Lokacharya. Pillai Lokacharya was explaining that we control the mind. After controlling the mind and the senses, then the senses become controlled, and then God sends us an acharya, right? He sends us a proper guru, and then the guru gives us the Tira mantra, Om Namo Narayanaya, right? We take initiation from the guru gives us the Tira mantra, and through the Tira mantra is non-different from the Lord. The Tira mantra, and through doing property, through the agency of the guru as the mediatrix, or the Purushakara, right? The mediator between us and God, the representative of Sri Devi or Mahalakshmi. Then through this whole process, right, we finally come to the point of accepting the Lord as the actual means, as the primary means. But all of these other things are initial means, right? Without controlling the mind, we can't control the senses. Without controlling the mind and senses, we won't get a proper guru. And without getting the guru, we won't get the Astakshara mantra and do property. and without doing property, we don't attain the Lord. But the Lord is the real primary means. So that's the point. And nothing else. So the Southern School emphasis is on the Lord only. Mam ekam. When Krishna says mam, he says me. Krishna says myself. Ekam. Mam ekam sharanam vraja. Only to me. Right? So there's no other means. There's no other means of salvation. Thus they deny that property, which for them consists largely of acceptance of the Lord's protection, can be called an upaya. Okay? So this is sort of these are all subtle points of difference between the emphasis. The process is basically the same for the Southern School and the Northern School, for the Wadagalais and Tengalais. But the emphasis is in detail is slightly different. Thus they deny the property, right, which for them consists largely of acceptance of the Lord's protection, can be called an upaya. Right. It is the Lord's autonomous and gracious will which saves the soul. So it's only the Lord's, his own, he is completely swatantra, he's completely independent. So he has this independence that he can save you or not save you. He's autonomous. But he's gracious also. It's not that he's not gracious, he is gracious. So he's autonomous and gracious, and by his will, he saves the soul, and not by anything else. The soul's acceptance is a mere result or epiphenomenon, right, of the Lord's grace, right? So in other words, we are often told that it's important for us to accept when Lord Rama says, just say that I am yours, right? Tavasmiti Sakrideva Prapannaya Tavasmiti Chayachate, in the Ramacharma Sloka in Ramayana, which is the final order of Lord Rama. He says, if a person who just simply says, I am yours. So the question is, does us saying that I am yours, or us doing something, or us even recognizing that we are the slaves of the Lord and completely subservient and dependent upon him, is that necessary? Do we have to do property? Do we actually have to do property? Do we have to do something, anything, to be saved? So the Southern School say, no, we don't actually have to do anything. The Lord's acceptance, the soul's acceptance, our acceptance of that the Lord is our master, or our acceptance to surrender unto him, is just a byproduct of the Lord's grace. It's the Lord's grace that saves us only, and not our acceptance of it. Whether we accept it or not, he saves us. Again, we go back to the example given by the two schools of the cat and the monkey. In the example of the monkey, which is taken by the Wadagalais, the Northern School, the baby monkey has to do something. It actually has to hang on. Even though it has very little strength, it still has enough strength to hang on to the back of the mother. Otherwise, it will fall off when the mother moves from tree to tree. But the baby kitten, the baby cat, right, doesn't have to do anything. And it can be saved by the mother. The mother cat can come and pick up the baby in its mouth and take it to safety. Even if the baby struggles, even if the baby doesn't want to be saved. So it's not dependent upon the acceptance of the baby to be saved. The baby kitten has no say in the matter. If the mother wants to pick it up and save it, she will. So this is the Southern School's point. The Southern School's point is the Lord will save you. The Lord is the upaya. He is gracious. He wants to save all living beings. Right? Of course, we could then ask the question, why doesn't he just save everybody if he's so gracious? Right? He is autonomous. He has his own agenda. He has his own leela. And so this whole material world is his leela. So somehow or other, those persons, the Southern School is trying to emphasize that those persons who think that even surrender to the Lord, our surrender to the Lord, we've done something. and by doing that, we get saved. And by not doing that, we don't get saved. This is not correct. It's only really the mercy of the Lord and the grace of the Lord that saves us, and not us being willing to take that mercy or accept that mercy or not. We have no choice. If he wants to save us, he's going to save us. If he doesn't want to save us, we're never going to be saved. So this is the Southern school wants to make very clear that it is not even property. It's not even property that is the means. The true means of salvation is only the Lord. It's a subtle point. It's a subtle point, because both sides, both schools, they're both performing property. Everybody's everybody's performing property. Everybody's surrendering to the Lord. So the question is, though, how important is that surrender? So this is just a small point that the Southern school says no. Just like the cat, the mother cat, and the kitten has no real say in it whatsoever. The kitten may want to be saved by the mother cat. The kitten may not want. The kitten may be totally ignorant and is still saved by the mother. It may even fight against being saved. May fight to be in this material world, the jiva. But somehow or other, if the Lord wants to save that jiva, he'll be saved. So, thus, as Manavala Mahamuni says, one is to think of one's own act of acceptance as worthless, right? So we should not be proud. We should not have any type of false ego thinking, I've surrendered to the Lord. Others have not. And I am going to therefore be saved because I surrendered to the Lord, because I did something. None of this I mentality should enter into it at all. We should not think that I have done anything that is worth anything, right? So when we hear the Charmasloka of Lord Ramachandra, he says, if you just simply say, I'm yours, you'll be saved. So we should think, oh, I should just say this, Tavasmiti, Tavasmi, I am yours. And because I did that, now I'm saved. No, it's not because you did that you're saved. Your doing that is actually worthless. So some people may say, well, Lord Rama asked you to do it. If you do it, how can you say that that's worthless? He asked you to do it. He wants you to do it. If you don't do it, he doesn't promise to save you. But if you do it, he promises to save you. So isn't that the process of moksha? That's the process of moksha. But the point that the Southern school is making, that Manavala Mahamuni and Pila Lokacharya are making, is that it actually only depends upon the grace of the Lord. It doesn't depend upon our surrender. It doesn't depend on anything that we do or not do. So whether we say Tavasmi or think Tavasmi, whether we come to that realization that we're completely helpless and hopeless, it doesn't matter. The Lord's going to save us. The Lord is going to save us. Or not save us. He's autonomous. He can save or not save. That's his grace. But he is gracious. He takes everything as an excuse. So he may take that as an excuse to save us. But we shouldn't have any ego whatsoever, thinking that anything that we have said or done like that has got any worth and that thing that we did is the cause of our liberation. That thing that we did is not the cause of our liberation. Only the Lord alone, Ekam, is the cause of our liberation. So, even without it, the Lord would still save the soul, right? And we'll see this later on in Mumuksupadi, in sutras or churnikas, 219 to 227. So when we get there, we'll even see that point illustrated. Okay, so the question is the process of surrender not an expression of our free will? Yes, of course. Yes, we have free will, but how we express our free will is not the determination of our liberation, right? There are people who are surrendered to the Lord. There are people who are not surrendered to the Lord, who want to be surrendered to the Lord, who do different amounts of activities and things to try to surrender to the Lord. But ultimately, it's the free will of the Lord. You have free will. The Lord also has free will. So it's His divine, what we call Satya Sankalpa, His eternal truthful will, to literally translate it. So it's His will whether you are liberated or you're not liberated. So yeah, as you say the word respected, I say He takes it, as an excuse to save the soul. But He may save a soul even without that, even without the process of surrender, even without the soul surrendering. We can have the example of like Jai and Vijay. Of course, they were eternal servants of the Lord, but there are certain demons they're fighting with the Lord, and they're killed by the Lord. They weren't surrendered. They weren't surrendered to Him, but they were killed, and somehow they got liberated by being killed by the Lord. So they weren't surrendered to Him, but still He liberates them. He considered Putana to be like a mother to Him, because she offered her milk to Him, but it was poisoned milk. She tried to kill Him. So He wasn't surrendered at all, but she got liberation. She was liberated. So liberation doesn't depend upon surrender. Yeah. So Vedanta Deshika now, to look at it from the other point of view, from the northern school or the Wadagalai Sampradaya, he objects to this view of the southern school because of the problems, right, prasanga of sarva mukti and vaisamyaner grihnya. If the Lord requires nothing of the soul to be saved, why haven't all souls been saved already? Right? So that's the first problem. The first problem that Vedanta Deshika sees is that this idea of sarva mukti, everybody's liberated, right? So the fact that they haven't been saved, and that the Lord is seen to save some and not others, means that He can be accused of partiality, right? Partiality to some, vaishamya, and cruelty to others, naigritnya. Okay, so in order to preserve His egalitarian mercy, right? He should be equal to all, right? And support the karmic laws of samsara, right? Says Deshika, right? The Lord, or Siddhopaya, Siddha means perfection, Upaya means the perfect means, right? The Lord is the perfect means. Does not bring about for the soul's, Siddhopaya does not bring about for the soul's salvation without some sign or pretext, Vyaja, in the form of performance of one of the sadhyopayas, either bhakti yoga or property. So Vedanta Deshika is being very clear here. He's saying, in the scriptures, the Lord has given different processes: karma yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, property. He's given these procedures for us to follow in the scriptures. And by following these procedures, one will, if you perfectly perform karma yoga, if you perfectly perform jnana yoga, if you perfectly perform bhakti yoga that has karma yoga and jnana yoga as its aids, if you perfectly perform these, then you will attain liberation. If you perform property, even if it's imperfectly performed, you will attain moksha. So Vedanta Deshika is saying, look, here it is in the scriptures. All these things are there in the scriptures. So these have to be done as some sort of sign, as something to show us, to show the Lord that we're serious about getting liberation. In the performance of one of the sadhyopayas, and the main sadhyopayas, right, that he talks about. Sadhya means the goal, and and upaya means the means of the goal, means towards the goal, right? either bhakti or prapatti, bhakti yoga or prapatti. Performance of these upayas is not contrary to the nature of the soul, to the soul's nature, according to Vedanta Deshika. Now, of course, we're going to hear from the southern acharyas, Pilelokacharya and Manavala Muni. They say it is a little bit contrary to the nature of the soul, and that's what we were discussing before. That the nature of the soul is absolute, complete subservience and slavery to the Lord, and dependence on the Lord. And that is more important, whereas Vedanta Deshika likes to emphasize the quality of the soul as being a doer, right? Kartritva, which is definitely more pronounced in scriptures that talk about Vedanta. When you study Vedanta, you'll study you'll study about the soul being consciousness, being pure consciousness or knowledge. I think, therefore I am, as Descartes said in Europe. So we are conscious beings, and because we are conscious, we know that we exist, and therefore we have that quality of consciousness. We also have the quality of doership, according to the Vedanta. According to Vedanta, the soul has the quality of doership. Now, it has a very small quality of doership, and because it can't do a lot, it can't create universes. It can do. It has free will, but it's limited. It has limited potency, these limited potencies like that. So Vedanta Deshika wants to emphasize this because he wants to emphasize all of these scriptural statements in the Vedanta that talk about the doership of the Lord, of the soul, the doership of the soul. Whereas the southern school, the Pilelokacharya and Manavala Muni Tengalai school, they want to emphasize that more important than these slight ability of the soul to be a doer, which is very limited, right? More important than that, the most important thing of the soul, if we want to describe the soul as anything, we have to describe it as completely subservient and dependent on the Lord. That's more important for the Southern school than this idea of emphasizing that the soul also has free will and is a doer, right? So we might say in Western philosophy, there's a discussion between free will and determinism. That some people they argue that no, everything is determined and there's no real free will, and other people they emphasize no, there is free will. There's definitely free will. There has to be some free will, and everything is not determined. But we see this between the Northern school and the Southern school, emphasizing doership and subservience. So Vedanta Deshika, he tries to make this argument. He tries to make this argument that the soul does have the ability to make its own effort, however meager that effort is, right? We're not saying the soul can itself give itself liberation or it can make some great effort, but it can make some small effort. Like Lord Rama says, just say Tavasmi, just say Tavasmi, just say I'm yours. Just say that, or just bow down before me, or just, just surrender unto me, just, in some way, some minor way like that. And I take that as an excuse and I'll save you like that. Whereas the Southern school, they want to emphasize that it isn't that. It's not that. It isn't that act. No matter how small that act be, it's not that act which saves you, right? If that act is necessary for you to be saved, then there's a prerequisite. Then there's a prerequisite to be saved, and there is no prerequisite to be saved. The Lord himself is going to save you out of his own sweet will. So the Lord is... So Vedanta Deshika again is emphasizing the minor effort of the soul and the act and act out of his own desire. So the soul has a desire for moksha, and he makes a slight effort. The soul is dependent but has a God-given ability to act. Jiva kartritva. So this is what we were talking about. So the soul is dependent, just like any servant or any slave is dependent on the master. But the servant or slave has his own independent, otherwise, if we didn't have an independent nature to work, what will we be doing in this material world? Here we are expressing our independent nature. So this is Vedanta Deshika's point. Therefore, it is not contrary to the soul's nature to use that ability to perform one of the satyopayas to express one's willingness to depend on the Lord as one's soul savior, right? So again, we go back to the example of a drowning man. Somebody who's drowning, right, certainly has the ability to try to save himself. Are his efforts going to save himself? No. He's going to drown. Left to his own devices, he's going to drown. There's nothing he can do to stop himself from drowning. The lifeguard, the person who is saving him, is the person who's going to actually save him. So he has to give up struggling. That was my point also in the last discussion. He has to give up struggling, this person who's drowning. So all of this karma yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, or even property, even thinking that I'm doing property, I'm saying tavasmi, I'm going through the motions of this, and that is what's saving me. No, if you think that's what's saving you, then that itself is a struggle. That itself is a struggle. The only thing which is actually saving you, according to the Southern School, according to Pillai Lokacharya Manavala Mamuni, is the fact that the Lord has his grace. It's the Lord himself that is saving you, right? It's not anything that you're doing or not doing. So again, we can go back to the analogy of the kitten and the mother cat. There's a little kitten, and the kitten, right? The kitten is struggling, but the mother cat picks it up firmly and saves it, right? There may be another kitten who is surrendered to the mother, who is just laying there and being limp, and the mother picks it up and saves it. In both cases, the kitten is saved. In both cases, this kitten is saved. So whether you surrender to God or you don't surrender to God, he's going to save you. Okay? All right. So, but this point about sarva mukti is an interesting point, and that then people obviously come up with this point. They'll say, well, why isn't everybody saved? Why isn't everybody saved? Well, the Lord has his autonomy. He has his own sweet will, right? If he wants to save someone, he can. If he doesn't want to, it sounds completely arbitrary. But as we go on, we will see more arguments one way and the other way, and we'll come to some more understanding. Therefore, it's not contrary to. Okay, so this is what Vedanta Deshika says. He's saying it's not really contrary to the jiva's nature of being a small doer to perform bhakti yoga or property or whatever, to perform these things, thinking that the Lord is one savior. The same issue underlines their disagreement on the interpretation of the word Vraja. To Manavala Muni and Pillai Lokacharya, Vraja is only a mental affirmation or acceptance of the Lord as the upaya, right? So it's simply a mental thing like that. It's not an actual action. Property is not an action. It's just a realization that we are of our situation. Our situation is that we are completely subservient and dependent upon the Lord. When we realize that, that's property. That's the way. So, when we realize that the Lord is our only Savior, so it is not some act which is enjoined as an upaya. Okay, so even though Rama says to say something and Krishna says to surrender to him, like that, we shouldn't think that the act of surrender or the act of saying something, right, is an act which causes liberation. It's in fact only the Lord that is the cause of liberation, and not our act. So neither the relinquishing of other upayas enjoined in parityaja. So not only should we not think that the positive act of surrender to the Lord, or doing bhakti yoga, right, or doing any of the other yogas, right, is our cause of liberation, but also giving up bad actions is also not the cause. It's not the cause of stopping us from going to liberation, right? So we have the example of Tondarati Podialwar, who was who succumbed to the charms of a prostitute, and he fell down and was enamored by her, and yet the Lord still saved him, and still considered him to be a great devotee, and even stole gold paraphernalia from Lord Ranganath, stole gold paraphernalia from his own puja and sent that to the prostitute as payment for the alwa. So it's not that anything that we do positive or spiritual, like surrender or bhakti yoga or any of the other yogas, anything that we do positive is the cause of our liberation. Neither is the cause of our not getting liberation doing something else. Some people may say, well, this seems to be against the whole idea of the angas of bhakti, of prapati, the angas of sharanagati. So anukulyasya sankalpa and pratikulyasya varjana are angas of their divisions of sharanagati. So what does that mean? Anukulyasya sankalpa means doing what the Lord says, doing things which are favorable to the Lord or favorable to His service, right? And pratikulyasya varjana means not doing things which are not favorable, which are unfavorable to His service. Don't do unfavorable things. Do good things. Don't do bad things. So what the Southern Acharyas are saying here is that your doing of good things is not your cause of liberation. Your not doing of bad things is not stopping you from liberation. Right? It's only the Lord Himself. That's it. Mam ekam, only the Lord. So parityaja also, right? Parityaja in the first line, which we discussed, sarvadharman parityaja. So the Lord says, abandon all varieties of religion, abandon all these other ways, like that. Well, what if you don't abandon those ways? Can you still be saved? Sure. Yes, of course, because the Lord has His own will. He can save you. So, neither the relinquishing of other upayas enjoined in parityaja, nor the bare mental phenomenon of acceptance, right, as a slave of the Lord, right, is an act. Neither of these things is an act. So doing any of these other things, doing karma yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, doing prapati, doing the process of prapati, giving up sinful acts or wrong acts or acts that are against things, right? None of these things are actually done by the jiva, according to the Southern school, right? Okay, in Vedanta, the idea is that the jiva is a doer. So we do understand that the jiva may be acting in some slight free will and doing these things, but the real cause is the Lord. The Lord is causing us to do these things and not do these things. So we don't. So therefore we can't say that anything we do or not do is saving us or not saving us. Right. And since, as stated above, neither one produces the result of salvation. So our prapati doesn't produce salvation. Our bhakti yoga doesn't produce salvation. The other yogas don't produce salvation. Our not doing forbidden acts doesn't produce salvation, right? None of these things produce salvation. Only the Lord is the one that produces salvation. He's the only giver of liberation, right? There is no basis, therefore, to call any one of them, because here she's talking about the act of property or the act of bhakti yoga, I believe, right? The mental acceptance of being a slave of the Lord, of being completely subservient to the Lord, or property, property is that. So neither one of these can be called an upaya. So we're going to see this later on in the Churnas, in the sutras 238 to 241. Vedanta Deshika sees no harm in affirming that Vraja enjoins the performance of property along with its angas, right? So once again, if we look at the northern school, the Vadagalai Sri Vaishnavas, what they're doing is they're saying that the Anukulyasya Sankalpa, Pratikulyasya Varjana, this verse with the six things which make up Sharanagati, they're saying that the five things, other than Sharanagati is the main thing, but these other five things of doing favorable acts, not doing unfavorable acts, having great faith, surrendering everything, feeling helpless and hopeless, all these different things are prerequisites. So for the northern school, these are prerequisites. For the southern school, they're not prerequisites at all, because there cannot be any prerequisite to property. There cannot be any prerequisite to, and as we saw in Srivachanabhushana, the only thing which is required for property is the Lord. The Lord is the important part of property, right? Only the Lord, and not any other person, to surrender to any other person, but only the Lord himself. But the surrender itself isn't even important. It's the Lord himself which is the means. So Vedanta Deshiga again doesn't see any harm in affirming that Vraja enjoins the performance of property along with its angas, its different angas of Anukulyasya, Pratikulyasya, Vajana, in view of the soul's God-given ability to act, which is affirmed in the Brahma Sutras themselves. So in the Brahma Sutras, we can't deny that the soul can act. We can't deny that the soul can have some kartritva, it has some doership, or that it has some slight independence. It has free will, slight free will. We can't deny these things because these things are there in Vedanta. We don't deny them, right? He rejects the argument that mental acceptance and relinquishing of non-acts or bad actions, for even refraining from an action, is a kind of action preceded by knowledge, will, and effort. Okay, so what he's saying that, okay, the southern acharyas are saying that we're not doing anything, even when we do property, there's no act involved. Actually, it's just the Lord himself becomes the means, and that's it. So when the Lord becomes the only means, then there's nothing that we do that is the means, right? What Vedanta Deshika is saying, even if you say you just had a mental acceptance of the Lord as the master, that's an act, according to Vedanta Deshika. That's an action. That's an action. Even if you just say, I didn't do this thing which is against the Shastras, against the will of the Lord, against the orders of the Lord, against the Lord being, against the ownership of the soul by the Lord, against his supreme majesty over us, his ownership and his control of us. If I try to do something against that, if I don't do something bad, right? If I don't do something bad, that's also an act, according to Vedanta Deshika. Vedanta Deshika says your non-action is also an action. If you don't do something, that's also an action. Just like we say, I'll give you an example of that, right? An example of that is fasting. What do we do when we fast? We don't eat. So normally we'll eat. Every day we'll have some food, we'll have some sustenance. If we say, today I'm going to fast, we are not eating. So we're not actually doing any action. We're actually refraining from doing an action that we would normally do. We would normally eat, and that's an action. So when we say I'm fasting, we're refraining from doing an action. But fasting itself is an action. It's considered an action. If somebody says to me, "What are you doing?" I'll say, "I'm fasting." If everybody else is eating and they say, "Why don't you take food?" and you say, "I'm fasting." What am I doing? I am fasting. So that is my action today. So that non-action is considered an action. So that's what Vedanta Deshika is saying. That even these non-actions, you say it's a non-action, it's actually an action, these things that you're saying. The final, okay, so thus he finds their argument to be inconsistent. So Vedanta Deshika has his points. We don't dispute that the Northern School has their points, and because Vedanta Deshika was mostly in Kanchipuram, he was preaching more out to outsiders outside the tradition, and he was not preaching to people inside the tradition. He was doing it mostly on the basis of Vedantic texts, which emphasize the doership and the minute free will of the soul. So therefore, he had to put those things forward because that was those were people that he was preaching to, right? That's what they were thinking, right? Whereas in Sri Rangam, everybody was a Sri Vaishnava already, so everybody was thinking about surrender to the Lord anyway, like that. So what the Southern School people did is they were preaching to people who were already surrendered to the Lord, already devoted to the Lord. They were already performing acts of devotion to the Supreme Lord. So they wanted just to emphasize that this small amount of false ego, to think that something that I'm doing is taking me to liberation, that has to be given up also. That also has to be given up, that idea. So not only do we think, and it's true for both the Wadagalais and Tengalais, even the Wadagalais, everything they do the Sattvika Tyaga before, they chant the Sattvika Tyaga mantras before they do something, and at the end when they finish doing that thing, every day they're doing that, and these mantras are there in Ramanuja's Nitya. It's a prayer to remind us that we are not the doer, that the Lord is actually doing everything through us, right? The Tengalai Acharyas just take it to the nth degree. They take it to the logical conclusion. The logical conclusion is, if I am praying that I am not doing this, that the Lord is doing this through me, well, what about property? What about our non-action, our non-doing of bad acts, right? That's also being done by the Lord. Everything is being done by the Lord. So if everything's being done by the Lord, then we're doing nothing, right? Then we have to say, right, that property also is not an upaya. Even though in the beginning, when we preach to people about property, we preach to them that it is an upaya. In actual fact, according to the Southern School, it's not really an upaya. Just like we said, in Sri Vachanabhushan, it talks about controlling the mind and senses, getting an acharya, getting the Tira mantra. All of these things are considered to be parts of property and ways to liberation, like that. But they're not really the way to liberation. Even the mantra is not a way to liberation, right? It's only the Lord himself. It's only the Lord himself, ultimately, that is the upaya. It's a very small distinction. The idea is, so for instance, let's say if we say controlling the mind is the way to, is if we don't control the mind, all these things don't come about. So does that mean that only by controlling the mind we can get liberation? No. Controlling the mind, controlling the senses. Well, if we control the mind and senses, is that enough? No. If we then get the acharya, is that enough? If he gives us a Tira mantra, is that enough? If we chant the Tira mantra a certain number of times or meditate upon it, is that enough? No. None of those things are enough. None of those things are an upaya. When we say upaya or a means, the means should be enough. If I say the means, the means of liberation is this, then if you do that, then you get liberated. But there isn't anything that you can do. There's nothing you can do, nothing that you can think, nothing that you can say that you will be liberated. Because it's all up to the Lord. He is the only upaya. Ultimately, he's the only one. Now, there's steps and things that you can go through. Traditionally, there's steps that you can go through. Shastrically, there's steps that you can go through, things that he's said that you can do. So you can do those things. But whether you do those things or not, whether you do all those things or not, whether you have all those 5 things, anukulyasya sankalpa, parikulyasya varjana, karpanya, whatever, whether you have those things or not, whether those things are there in you, right, or not, he can still liberate you. And even if you have all those things, he may not liberate you. It's completely up to him. He is the only upaya, and you have to just surrender to that. Surrender to the fact that you don't have anything to do with it. Now, Vedanta Deshika says even that surrender, even that giving up of your idea of doing anything, that is an act. So maybe we can ask Dr. Chirnarayan, when we do Sattvika Tyaga, right? When we go through the motions of saying that I am not the doer, aren't we doing something? Aren't we doing something when we do that? Why do we have to do it then? Why do we have to say the Sattvika Tyaga mantra? That's an action. To show that we're not the doer. It's a catch-22, what we call a catch-22 in English, it's a circular argument. So this is a fallacy in logic. Catch-22 is a fallacy in logic where one thing depends on the other thing, like that. So the Southern Acharyas are simply saying, look, the only thing that is the upaya, the only means to liberation is the Lord himself. That's the only real means to liberation. Now, all these other things, like in previous lives, we performed some agata sakriti, some unknown pious acts, and that's brought us to this life, and we brought us to be able to control our mind and senses and attain an acharya and get the Tira mantra and be initiated and all these things. And so therefore we can say that we did some act at some point that initiated all these things, but we didn't do that. The Lord arranged for that to be done. The Lord did that through us. So we should never ever think that even we have even a small part that we played in our own salvation. We have not played any part in our salvation whatsoever, according to the Southern School of Sri Vaishnavism. Nothing. There is no other upaya but the Lord himself. That's it. Now, we want to say that in a way that doesn't contradict the Shastra, that doesn't contradict the Brahma Sutras, and Vedanta Deshika's points are well taken, that the soul has slight doership and has got slight free will, minute free will, right? So we accept that. At the same time, what's more important is to emphasize the complete and utter dependence and subservience of the soul, and not at all any of the false ego that the soul can do or say or act in any way to save himself. That's the Southern system. That's the doctrine of the Southern Sampradaya school. Okay, so now moving on to the last point, the final area of dispute in the Charamasloka, Krishna Charamasloka, is Sarva Pape Bhyo Mokshayishyami. Sarva Pape Bhyo Mokshayishyami. Mokshayishyami is future. It's a future tense of the I will give you moksha. I will offer you moksha. I will save you. I will liberate you, right? Sarva Pape Bhyo, from, right? Pape Bhyo is plural ablative, from Sarva Papa. Sarva means all. Papa means sins, which means not only the sins, but the reactions to the sins, right? So I'll save you, I'll liberate you from the reactions of all sinful activities, right? So does the phrase all sins include either future offenses performed after seeking refuge? So if I say to you, all sins, do you think God is going to forgive me only for the sins that I did in the past or I'm committing in the present? Or is he also going to forgive me for the sins that I perform in the future? What about the sins I perform in the future unknowingly? Maybe somebody might think, oh, maybe God will forgive me for unknowing sins in the future. But what if I knowingly and wantonly commit sin in the future? Is God going to forgive me for that? So this is a question. This is a very interesting question. Does it include deliberate as well as unintentional sins? Right? So there's somebody might make a slip and they make an unintentional sin, but somebody else may sin on purpose. Both schools agree that surrendering to Lord only once assures forgiveness of all past and subsequent or future unintentional sins, guaranteeing attainment of the Lord or liberation at the end of one's present lifetime. Let me say that again. Both schools of Sri Vaishnavism, and this is unlike any other form of Vaishnavism, because in the other forms, in the other sampradayas, or even other systems of religion, right, nobody says that you will be completely saved from all your sins, right, past, present, or future, as long as the future ones are unintentional, right, and that you will be guaranteed to attain liberation, the eternal service of the Lord, right, in Vaikuntha at the end of one's present lifetime. And this is something that was discussed before, that when we talk about bhakti yoga, which the other schools of Vaishnavism talk about as being the method of attaining liberation, what to speak of other schools of philosophy which talk about karma yoga, jnana yoga, whatever it is. These other paths of effort, of self-effort, of great self-effort, they may take a long time and not just one lifetime. But specifically, the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya emphasizes that at the end of this lifetime, no matter what, each person who takes up this process of accepting the Lord as the only means, right, will be saved at the end of this present lifetime. So the question only becomes about future sins which are done intentionally, right? Because here she's saying, both schools agree that surrendering to the Lord once, just once, assures forgiveness from all past and subsequent future unintentional sins, guaranteeing attainment of the Lord at the end of one's present lifetime. But Vedanta Deshika, based on the Lakshmi Tantra is a Pancharatra Agama Samhita, right? 1793 says that in case of any subsequent deliberate sin, right? Vedanta Deshika is quoting Lakshmi Tantra, and he's saying in Lakshmi Tantra it says, if you do a sin after surrendering to the Lord, then you have to, another property or another surrender has to be performed, all right, as an act of atonement or prayaschitta. So it's very common in Hinduism in general, the idea of prayaschitta or atoning for one's sins. Even in other religions like Catholicism, you go to the church, you make a confession, you say, I did a sin, and the priest tells you, okay, you have to do this penance, you have to fast, or you have to do some japa or whatever you have to do, and you'll be forgiven for that sin. But you have to surrender again, you have to say what you did, you have to acknowledge your sin, and after acknowledging your sin, then you can be freed from that sin, but you have to perform some prayaschitta or atonement or penance, right, in order to avoid some mild punishment for the sin. Because you're surrendered to the Lord, you're not going to get the same sin as somebody who's not surrendered to the Lord, but in order to avoid even this mild punishment, right, as possible prolongation of the lifetime in order to experience that punishment. So maybe the Lord extends your life so that you can have another disease, or you can feel some more aches and pains of old age, like that, as some sort of punishment for that sin, right? This is Vedanta Deshika's idea, right? And we've heard this before, because in the northern school, the Vadagalai Sampradaya that follow Vedanta Deshika, what they do is they approach the guru and they take initiation, but they don't actually do the property until they do another ceremony called Paranyasam, where they pray to offer the burden of all their sins that they've committed up until then, right, through the agency of the guru to the Lord, in which they are destroyed, right? So when they do that, and then after that they vow to be very good, to criticize anybody, not to take food outside the house, not to worship any other demigods or devatas, but only strictly be one focused worshiper of Sriman Narayana only. So when they do that, and some of them wait until the end of life, and they wait until they've finished They've finished doing so many their business throughout their life. They've had kids. They've raised their children. Their children are out of the house, so the children are grown up and married themselves, and they can just retire and concentrate on spiritual things, and therefore there's not much chance of them committing further sin, intentionally or unintentionally. But here, what Vedanta Deshika is saying, according to his idea from the Lakshmi Tantra, is that if you do this, you have to do another property. But the problem with this idea is that we said before that property is once only. Again, the Ramacharma sloka says, Sakrideva prapadana parma. Sakrideva means, Eva means only. Sakrid means once. Sakrideva means once only. And as we saw before in the last paragraph, right, both schools of Sri Vaishnavism accept that surrendering to the Lord only once assures forgiveness from all past and subsequent unintentional sins, guaranteeing attainment of the Lord at the end of one's present lifetime. So both schools of Sri Vaishnavism believe that you just simply surrender to the Lord, and at the end of that lifetime, you'll be saved. You'll go to eternal service of the Lord, which is the idea of moksha or liberation in Sri Vaishnavism. The question only comes is where Vedanta Deshika doubts this idea that if there's some intentional sin, or there's some, now, people who have taken Samashrinam, they've taken initiation, they've lived their lives as Sri Vaishnavas, at the end of their lives, their Vadiga lives, they've done the Bharanyasam, and then again they sin. Again they sin after that, right? Then Vedanta Deshika says they have to do some atonement, they have to do some prayaschitta, they have to do another property. They have to surrender again. My question would be, what do they have to surrender again? If I have surrendered something, right? So if I have something in my possession, right? Actually, we don't have anything in our possession, but we think out of false ego that we have the soul is our possession. The soul is not your possession. The soul is a possession of the Supreme Lord. That's the first problem that occurs here. So we think that we have the soul is in our possession and that we surrender it to the Lord. We think that. Okay, so that's fine. We think that. So once we surrender it to the Lord, then how can we surrender it again? How can it be again surrendered? How can surrender be done twice? Logically, it can't be done twice, because once you surrender it to the Lord, once you realize that you are not the possessor of the soul, right? You're not the possessor of the body, you're not possessor of the mind. That's obvious, right? For anybody who studies Vedanta, right? That we're not this mind, we're not this body. We don't possess these things, right? The soul, we're not even the possessor of our own soul. So then how can we think that if we don't think that we're the possessor of something, how can we surrender it? So once we've come to that realization, right, that the Lord is the only controller and master, and we're completely subservient and dependent upon him, then how can we think that we can surrender again? We can. So continuing on, so his idea, Vedanta Deshika's idea, was maybe your life will be extended a little bit and you'll suffer some mild punishment for this sin that you commit after you do the Bharanyasa, after you do the complete surrender in the Vadiga Sampradaya. Also, it's very, I would just say, I just have to make a point here, that it's a sort of dangerous to put off surrender until the end of one's life, because we don't know when we may die. We may die, in the next minute. Just right now we may die. So how do we know? This material world is full of dangers at every step. So we could die any moment. So it's most important for us to approach an acharya and to do property through the agency of an acharya, right? As soon as possible. As soon as possible, we shouldn't put it off. Surrender to the Lord and property should be done as soon as possible. by everybody. Once you come to that realization that you have to do this, right? That this is the way to go, do it as soon as possible. At the same time, don't forget that point that we were discussing before, that actually you're doing it or not doing it is not the cause of your liberation. Okay? It's not the true cause. The true cause is the Lord. But there is a system which the Lord lays out in the Shastras and which is very, is very good to follow. But simply the mental understanding that we are of our true nature, that is property. That is the acceptance of the Lord only as the upaya, as the means to liberation. So the acharyas of the Sri Rangam school, or the southern school, the Tengalai acharyas, Manavala Mamuni and Pilalokacharya, reject the idea of repeated property as an atonement. It's rejected. We reject the idea that there can be two properties, right? You surrender and that's it. Once you surrendered, you're surrendered. There's nothing, you can't surrender anything else because you don't have anything else to surrender. Appealing more to the adjacent verses in Lakshmi Tantra. So if we look in the Lakshmi Tantra and we look at those verses, the adjacent verses to the one that Vedanta Deshika, 17th chapter, 93rd verse, that Vedanta Deshika quotes, which affirm that property is to be done only once. So what the southern school, what the Pilalokacharya and Manavala Mamuni are accusing Vedanta Deshika of doing is cherry picking verses from the scripture to put forward his doctrine, but not understanding those verses in context. Not understanding those verses in context. So yes, there's a verse, 1793 in Lakshmi Tantra, which seems to talk about prayaschitta. But if we look at it in context, in the whole context, we understand that property can only be done, or sharanagati or surrender can only be done once. If we take one verse out of Lakshmi Tantra and we insist that it means something different than all the other verses in context, then this is disingenuous, according to the southern school, right? That Vedanta Deshika's got it wrong, that he is misunderstood, he's cherry-picked and taken something out of context. So, at any rate, since this is not an act, right? Since not an act, right? So even then, the southern Sri Vaishnavas, right? They recognize that, okay, so the Wadagalais, they do the Paranyasa and they surrender everything, and then afterwards they sin, and then they do some other prayaschitta or atonement for that sin by doing another property, right? But in either case, because the southern school says that property itself is not an act, right? Remember, they say property itself is not an act, right? That even that mental understanding that you're a slave of the Lord, or even approaching the Acharya, this is not an act. It's not your act, right? It's the act of the Lord, right? So subsequent, at any rate, since this is not an act according to the southern school's philosophy anyway, there's no question of doing it again. Do you understand? So here's a second argument by the southern school, right? The northern school of Sri Vaishnavas, the Wadagalais, say, we do the act of surrender, and by doing the act of surrender, we are saved. They do the Paranyasa, and by doing the Paranyasa, they're saved. The southern school says, no, you're not doing that. The Lord is doing that through you. The Lord is the only upaya. He's the only means of liberation, and not your act of Paranyasa. That's not an act. It's not your act, right? So if you think that that's your act, then yeah, okay, maybe you have to do another one if you sin afterwards. But since that's not an act, even your second property is also not an act, right? So really, the southern Vaishnavas the southern school, in this second point here, they're saying it doesn't really matter. It's not a point, because we don't accept that you did an act first to liberation, so we don't accept that you did a second act to do it, right? So neither do we accept that you did the first act, nor do we accept that you did the second act. You didn't do Bharanyasa, and you didn't do the Prayaschitta property either. And if we see factually, when the Vadagalai Sri Vaishnavas do everything, as I said, they do this. They go through this. They go through this formal system of saying that they're not the actor. They're not doing the act. Well, when they do Bharanyasa, they go through this same thing. They say, Bhavaneva Swaniyamya Swarupasthiti, etc. They say the Sattvika mantra, and they say, I'm not doing the act. Well, wait a minute. Are you surrendering, or you're not surrendering? If you're active, if you think that the Bharanyasa is an act of surrender and you say, I'm not doing it, then who's doing it? You're saying yourself that God is doing it. So if God is doing it, then it's not your act, right? Similarly, your second act after you've committed a sin after Bharanyasa and your Prayaschitta property is also not your act. So what the Tengalais are saying is, no matter which way you cut it, no matter which way you explain it, property is not an act. It's not your act. You're not doing it. The Lord is doing it through you. He is the only means of liberation, right? Just accept it like that. So since he's the one who did the first act, why you insist he has to do it again? It doesn't make any sense. That Northern School's idea doesn't make any sense. He's doing the first act. He's doing the Bharanyasa, right? Then why should he have to do it again? He doesn't. He doesn't. Right. Anyhow, they have their customs, they have their ways of doing things, and we understand that they're trying to emphasize, Vedanta Deshika and the Vadagalais are trying to emphasize the Vedantic idea that the soul is a doer and the soul has slight free will. They're trying to emphasize that. What we're trying to emphasize, the Southern School of the Pilalokacharya Manavala Monami, we're trying to emphasize that the soul is completely and absolutely, utterly dependent and subservient on the Lord, and that is the most important aspect of the soul. Not its slight doership, not its slight free will. Those things are not important. Yes, those things exist because we understand they're there in Vedanta, and because we are parts and parcels of the Lord. We are like a small spark. He's like a great fire. The small spark also has some fire. It has some heat, right? But has nothing. You can easily catch a spark or and in between your fingers and put it out, right? Whereas a big fire, you're going to burn, right? So yeah, there's a little bit of heat there, but it's so minute. It's not relevant, right? So the free will and the small amount of doership that the soul can have is not relevant to the soul situation. What is more relevant, what is most relevant to the soul, is the fact that the soul is completely and utterly subservient and dependent upon the Lord. That's what's most relevant to the situation of the soul, right? Of course, in this material world, we think our doership and our free will is most important. That's false ego, and that will keep us in the material world. That's what keeps us here, right? So when we give up that and we understand, no, only his will is important. Our will is not at all important. Our doership is not at all important. Only that we understand that we're completely subservient and dependent upon him. That's what's most important. And that's what's emphasized by the Southern Acharyas. And the Northern Acharyas, they're emphasizing the Vedantic truth. It's truth. But because it's only half truth, and it's neglecting the other half of the truth, which is much more important part of the truth. That's what the Southern Acharyas say, the Tengalai Acharyas say. No, this is a more important aspect of the soul than its minute free will, its minute doership. That's the point. So when subsequent, so that's the point. So the Southern School Acharyas, they look at this idea of doing another property as being ridiculous. Why would I do another property? Why would I have to do another property when I didn't even do the first property? I don't have to surrender again because I never surrendered in the first place. My surrender in the first place was not my surrender. It was his surrender through me. He's the only thing which is important, not us. If we keep saying, no, it's important for me to do property, it's important to me to do prize to the property, it's important for me. No, it's me. That is false ego. That is a small amount of false ego. Even in the process of surrendering, that false ego, that small false ego has to be given up. That's what the Southern Acharyas are saying. So, there's no point to talking about a second property because that's not your property to do, and neither was the first one. When subsequent sin occurs, right, for whatever reason, intentional or unintentional, right, after property, after surrender, which in the case of Tengalais is at Samashrinam, at the initiation, Panchasamskara, and for Vadagalais, which is at the Bharanyasam, which may come early in life or later in life, whenever they decide that they want to take that step, right, and actually surrender to the Lord. Otherwise, they feel that the Panchasamskara, the Samashrinam, is simply approaching the Acharya, right? But whenever they really get serious and they want to, they want to perform property and surrender to the Lord, they do the Bharanyasa. So then after that, in the case of Vadagalais, after the Samashrinam in the case of Tengalais, right, if any sin occurs, whether intentional or unintentional, all one has to do is remember that one has sought refuge in the Lord as one's upaya. We just have to remember. That we did accept the Lord as the only means. That's all you have to do is just remember that you accepted the Lord as the only means. And that the Lord himself has promised to free us of all sins. What does he say? Again, back here. Moksha yishami masuchaha. Don't fear. Moksha yishami. Sarva pape byo moksha yishami. Sarva pape byo, from all sins, past, present, future, intentional, unintentional, whatever, all. The Southern Acharyas take the word sarva to mean all, absolutely all sins. He will protect you, and he will release you from the reaction to absolutely all sins, and will lead you to moksha or to liberation. Like that. Whereas the interpretation of the Northern Acharyas, like Vedanta Deshika, is he'll protect you from all those sins that you did before, which were unintentional, or which you're going to perform, which are unintentional. But any intentional sins, you'll have to do, again, another prayaschitta property. You'll have to do an atonement, which means you'll have to do property again. Okay. So now, I hope that's clear. I don't know how much more I could say about that, but those. Now we come to the end of talking about the slight differences in the understanding between the two. Now remember the two understandings of the Tira mantra, the Dvaya mantra, and the Charma Sloka of Lord Krishna. Now we're going to discuss those mantras in Mumuksupadi later on, and remember that this is a book of the Southern School of the Tengalai Sri Vaishnavas, Manavala Muni and Vilalokacharya, right? And therefore, we're going to see their understanding. If we want to understand more, in more detail, the idea of the Northern Acharyas, like Vedanta Deshika, we can read Vedanta Deshika's Chilarai Rahasyangal and also his magnum opus, Rahasyatraya Saram, which explains his point of view. So now, continuing on, later developments in the Rahasya tradition, or the secret tradition, so the tradition of explaining the esoteric meaning of the secret mantras which come in Samashrinam or Panchasamskara. It's property for Tengalais, it's not property for Vadagalais, property comes later at Bharanyasam. Okay, so later developments in the Rahasya tradition. The Sri Vaishnavacharyas continued to write Rahasya commentaries and sub-commentaries on existing Rahasya texts up to the present day. So even up until the present day, people are still writing commentaries, explaining more of these things in detail. In the 17th to 19th centuries, these were often written in Sanskrit as Manipravala. Now, Mani Pravala, as we described before, Mani means jewels. It refers to pearls, and Pravala means coral. So pearls and coral. So the mixture of Sanskrit and Tamil. So it's more or less Sanskrit terminology with Tamil endings on it, right? Grammatically put together in a way that Tamil-speaking people can understand it. So it's Sanskrit jargon or Sanskrit technical terms, right? Which are strung together with Tamil grammar. Okay, so this is called Mani Pravala. Anybody who's if you're at the moment we're studying Stotra Ratna with a commentary by Perivachan Pillai, and he writes in Mani Pravala. So you can see that it's all written in Tamil text, but it's actually filled with Sanskrit words. So you know the Sanskrit terminology and you understand the Tamil text. So it was written for the common people who were not Sanskrit pundits. Ramanuja wrote all of his books, all his 9 books. Yamunacharya wrote all his books, all in Sanskrit. Many people have written things in Sanskrit only, but that means it's only possible for people who are very adept at Sanskrit, who are Sanskrit scholars, to understand those books. So therefore, the Rahasya commentaries, the commentaries on these esoteric mantras, were written in Mani Pravala so that the common people could also understand them. They could also understand them, even though there are some technical Sanskrit words in there, but it's all strung together in Tamil, so it's understandable. So it's just like we get some here, even in the English, we're getting some technical terms written in Sanskrit, and and we have to explain those terms like that. So Mani Pravala is the preferred language or method of writing style, the writing style that's used by people who write commentaries like this. Even Vedanta Deshika, even the Northern School, even though all these acharyas know Sanskrit perfectly, but they write them in Mani Pravala so that everybody else can also read them. So in the present century, several noted acharyas and scholars have published loose translations and simplifications of the classical Rahasyas in simple modern Tamil. So you find this also, even today, you go on YouTube, go on the internet, and you'll find many acharyas of the Northern School, the Southern School, the Wadagalais, the Tengalais. You'll find people of all different schools speaking and explaining these things in not only Tamil, but even in other vernacular Indian languages like Telugu and Kannada, even Hindi, whatever. You'll find people explaining, and you'll find people explaining in English. You'll also find people explaining in English, which has become the lingua franca, the main world language. So some new sub-commentaries on the earliest works have also appeared. However, none of these subsequent Rahasya works have gained the popularity or prestige of the Mumuksupadi with Manavala Mamuni's commentary for Tengalais, or the Rahasya Trayasara, right, of Vedanta Deshika for the Wadagalais. So these are the 2 books that people should be studying first. We should study the Mumuksupadi, which we're going to be studying here. And we should also, if we want to understand Vedanta Deshika's point of view, and he has some good points too, study Rahasya Trayasaram. So continuing on, we have seen that the number of mantras or Rahasyas became fixed at 3 by the time of Parasara Bhatta. Again, Parasara Bhatta was one of the twin sons of Kuresha or Kurdalwan, one of the main disciple of Ramanuja. No other mantras have been added since that time, at least not under the name of mantras. However, as far back as Perivachan Pillai's time, we begin to see signs of the proliferation of charma slokas. Right? So even back at the time of Perivachan Pillai, right? We see that there's a proliferation of more charma slokas, more final slokas. So we have Krishna's charma sloka, we have Rama charma sloka, we have Varaha charma sloka. Now there are 2 more charma slokas in addition to that of the Bhagavad Gita, which are esteemed by Sri Vaishnava tradition. as important in teaching property. The Ramacharma Sloka from the Ramayana and the Varaha Charma Sloka, which comes in the Varaha Purana. The Ramayana Charma Sloka is Rama's words to Vibhishana when Vibhishana sought refuge at the feet of Rama. Sakrideva Prapannaya Tavasmiti Chayachite Abhayam Sarvabhutebhyo Dadam Yetat Pratam Mama. One who resorts to me even once and pleads, I am yours. To him I give protection from all beings. This is my vow. We can also note that Sarvabhutebhyo is, here it's being said, means from all beings, but it can mean for all beings or to all beings. He gives protection, because it can also be understood as being dative as well as ablative, because both dative and ablative is Sarvabhutebhyo. Okay, Perivachan Pillai has a lengthy commentary in this passage in his Ramayana Tani Sloka, which is a work expounding significant passages in the Valmiki Ramayana. His younger contemporary, Nadadurammal of Kanchi, quotes this passage and the Bhagavad Gita's Charma Sloka together, introducing them as, quote, what the Lord has disclosed in both Ramayana and Mahabharata. Vedanta Deshika wrote an entire Rahasya text on the meaning of this sloka called Abhaya Pradana Saram. Abhaya Pradana Saram has been translated into English, and I'm hoping that Dr. Tirunarayan, who also knows this, will help us to understand that Abhaya Pradana Saram about Vibhishana Sharanagati in the Ramayana. Hopefully he'll give us a class on that. None of these authors refer to this passage as a Charma Sloka, so we may assume that this terminology arose later. Okay. In this context, we might point out further development of the mantra tradition outside Tamil Nadu in the tradition of Ramananda. Now, who is Ramananda? Right? It's going to explain. Who founded a sect bearing his name in Benares area in the late 14th and early 15th century. Ramananda, who claims to be a Sri Vaishnava in a Guru Parampara descending from Ramanuja, teaches 3 mantras in his Sri Vaishnava Matabja Bhaskara. Hello, Devendra. Hello.
Sorry, Bharat.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to, yeah. So yeah, you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to not allow you to unmute yourself, and if anybody wants to ask a question, they can type it in the chat, and I will watch the chat. And if you want to be unmuted, then you let me know in the chat, and I'll unmute you. Okay. All right. Let's continue on. Okay. Ramananda, who claims to be a Sri Vaishnava in a Guru Parampara descending from Ramanuja, teaches 3 mantras in his Sri Vaishnava Matabja Bhaskara. 2 of these will be easily recognized as the Tira mantra and Dwaya mantra, with the name Rama substituted for that of Narayana. The Mula mantra, instead of being Om Namo Narayanaya, or right, is Om Ramaya Namaha, or Om Namo Ramaya, right? She says here Om Ramaya Namaha. And the Rama Dwaya mantra is Srimad Ramachandra Charano Sharanam Prapadye Srimati Ramachandraya Namaha. Right? The third mantra, of the Ramanandiya sect is none other than the Ramayana Charanamastloka, Sakrideva Prapannaya, Tavasmiti Chayachite, Abhayam Sarvabhutebhyo. Where is it back here? Dadam Yetat Pratam Mama. Okay. So, KKA Venkatachari, who is a scholar, Sri Vaishnava scholar who was the head of an Antachari Indological Research Institute in Mumbai, for many years. His recent investigations have brought to light that the terms and ideas Ramananda uses in interpreting these mantras show clearly that he has been influenced by the works of Perivachan Pillai and possibly also Pillai Lokacharya. The Varaha Charma Sloka is actually 2 slokas, consisting of 2 slokas supposedly spoken by the Lord to Bhumi, Lord as Varaha incarnation, in the Varaha Purana. And she says here, though the passage is not found in current editions, okay, I would suggest to you that that's incorrect. I have an edition of Varaha Purana, and the verses are definitely there in Varaha Purana. So perhaps she looked in some edition of Varaha Purana didn't have those verses, and here they are. Stite manasi suswaste sharire satiyo naraha datu samye stite smarta vishvarupam chamamajam tatastam mriyamanam tu kashta pasana sannibam aham smarami madbhaktam nayami paramam gatim. Especially the last line is very nice. Aham smarami madbhaktam. I remember my devotee and I take him to the supreme destination. So, if a man whose mind and body are stable and strong, whose vital signs are good, should think of me, the unborn one in all forms, then when he is dying and lies inert like a log or a stone, I will remember him, my devotee, and lead him to the supreme state. Perivachan Pillai comments on this passage in his Bharatadi Tanishloka. In a work which interprets important slokas of the Mahabharata and the Puranas. Vedanta Deshika quotes it in chapter 20 of his Rahasya Saram. So these mantras, the Rama Charma Sloka and the Varaha Charma Slokas, they are very important, both to Vedanta Deshika and to Perivachan Pillai, people of the northern and southern schools. Vedanta Deshika quotes it in his chapter 20 of Rahasya Saram and has a rather elaborate exegesis on its meaning in his Rahasya Shikamani. Though without referring to this passage as a Charma Sloka, he emphasizes its importance in teaching property as an easy path to moksha, one which does not demand that one's final thoughts be on the Lord, as does Bhakti Yoga. Right? So this is the important point. If we look back here, what is Lord Varaha saying? Lord Varaha is saying here that if you were my devotee and you remembered me in your lifetime, if you were doing things, you were serving me, or you were surrendered to me, right? When you were healthy, then when you're dying, when you're lying and dying in your last days, in your last hours of life in this body, maybe you're in a coma, maybe you're unconscious, maybe you're in so much distress and pain that you can't think of me. Maybe you're just lying there like a stone or a log. You don't have to take the effort to remember me. I will remember you. Once again, the southern school of Sri Vaishnavism, the Lord does everything. The Lord is the upaya. The Lord is the only upaya, and we don't have to do anything. So we don't even have to remember him at the time of death. Whereas, if we emphasize, like the northern school, the doership of the soul, then we emphasize also the Vedantic texts like Bhagavad Gita, which is part of the Prasthana Trayi. The Bhagavad Gita says, Aham yam yam vapi smaran bhavan, whatever you think of at the time of death, that you will attain. So either that's right or the other's right. Either we remember the Lord and we go to the Lord, or we remember the devatas, go to them. We remember the pitris and go to them. We remember the demons and go to them. We remember something and go there. So one is right and one is wrong. One has to be correct and one has to be wrong. Here the Lord himself says, you don't have to remember me. I will remember you. Right? Once again, the Lord is the only upaya. The Lord is the only upaya. There's a very famous story about Ramanujacharya, that Ramanuja had different questions about philosophy, and he also had a question after Yamunacharya passed away. He had a question about who to take initiation from. And he went with these 6 questions to Varadaraj Perumal, who is the deity in Kanchipuram. Remember, Ramanuja was born in a little town just outside Kanchipuram called Sri Perumbudur. He grew up going to school in that town or in Kanchipuram itself, at the Gurukul of Yadava Prakash. And then later on, when he left Yadava Prakash, because he didn't like his initial Gurukul teacher's teachings, he ended up going and taking shelter and wanting to take initiation from Yamunacharya, but unfortunately, when he reached Sri Rangam, Yamunacharya had passed away. So at this point, Ramanuja had these doubts. He had some philosophical doubts, and he also had this doubt about who to take initiation from. So he knew that there was a very great devotee of Yamunacharya called Kanchipurna. And he approached that person, and because he knew that person was in the temple and had the service in the temple of fanning the deity of Varadaraj Perumal in Kanchipuram. Lord Varadaraja is the main temple. The main deity is the Lord Varadaraja, and so he went there because he knew this guy was a great devotee, and he knew that he had intimate contact with the deity. So he believed that if he asked this person to ask the Lord the questions, that the Lord, through this person, would give him the answers. So one question that he had was, it says in the Bhagavad Gita that we have to remember God at the time of death. It says in the Vedantic text that we have to remember God at the time of death, and then we'll attain God, liberation. So is that really true? Is that really necessary? Do we have to do that? Lord Varadaraja came back with the answer, no. You don't have to remember me at the time of death. If you're surrendered to me, I will remember you, which is exactly the same thing that Lord Varaha says here in the Varaha Charma Sloka. So whenever we hear some anecdote that somebody said something, we like to find the pramana, we like to find the scriptural statement that backs it up. So here is the scriptural statement, the Varaha Charma Sloka, that backs up this idea that we don't have to think of God at the time of death. Somebody might ask the question that the Bhagavad Gita is a very important scripture. It's part of Mahabharata. Mahabharata is an itihasa. When we study Srivachanabhushana, it ranked the different shastras as being more and less important pramanas or proofs. The Vedas being the highest proof, then the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and then the Puranas. So this is a proof from the Puranas. Is it not less proof than the proof that comes in the Mahabharata? That's somebody could make that argument. I'm sure somebody could make that argument. I'm not quite sure why. We have both the Lord himself saying that, Lord Varadaraja is saying that himself. So it's not just that Lord Varaha says it in the Varaha Purana, but Devaraj Perumal told this to Ramanuja. So perhaps in other sampradayas, this is not an important proof because it comes in Varaha Purana, and maybe some people, they don't find Varaha Purana to be very important. They don't have an acharya who asked this to a deity, and the deity told him that I will remember you. So perhaps in other sampradayas, this is not a very important point, but among Sri Vaishnavas, it's an important point, and especially amongst Tengalais, because maybe the Wadagalais feel that there has to be some effort put into remembering God at the time of death. But as far as I know, everybody accepts the Ramacharma Sloka, and everybody accepts the Varahacharma Sloka. And the Varahacharma Sloka is very clear that Antima Smriti is not necessary. And the whole idea of property is that we don't have to do bhakti yoga. We don't have to perform some act of self-effort. So even this remembrance of God, Antima Smriti, at the time of death, is a form of self-effort, right? So my argument against the idea that the Gita is a greater pramana because it comes from Mahabharata than the Purana here, right, is that what is being spoken of here is property. What is being spoken of there is bhakti yoga. So in the Bhagavad Gita, the paths of effort are being said. So we even have, at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, we have the Charma Sloka of Lord Krishna. Lord Krishna says, just surrender unto me and I'll save you. So if the person is surrendered to Krishna, everything that came before that in the Bhagavad Gita, like remembering Krishna at the time of death, is superseded by that surrender. Right? So we don't need to appeal to a Purana for proof of that. The Purana gives us confirmation of the Krishna Charma Sloka. So some people will say, we only need Varahacharma Sloka. No, we don't only need Varahacharma Sloka. Some people say we only need Ramacharma Sloka. We need all three of these Charma Slokas because they all emphasize different things. They support each other. So Lord Krishna tells us that he'll absolve us of all sins, past, present, and future, if we just surrender unto him. That act of surrender is to be done once only. Lord Rama explains that, and it's a very simple process. Lord Varaha tells us that once these things are done, one doesn't have to remember God at the time of death. One doesn't have to put in that effort that is given there in the whatever chapter it is where it talks about Yam Yam Pavismaran Bhavan. I don't remember exactly the sloka and chapter. So the Antima Smriti explained in Bhagavad Gita becomes no longer necessary. It's necessary. It may be necessary for somebody who is a bhakti yogi or karma jnana yogi, right? But for a person who is a prapana, it's not necessary. So again, somebody who just preaches, right? Yam yam vapi smaran bhavan. That is the complete absolute truth. That is, you have to accept that whatever you think of at the time of death, that you will achieve. That you will go to that in your next life. Somebody who just preaches that is cherry picking. He's taking one sloka out of the Gita, but he's not taking the other sloka out of the Gita, which obviates that, which negates that. That is the Charma Sloka of Lord Krishna, because Krishna says, just surrender unto me and you go to moksha. I'll absolve you of all sins and you go to moksha. Moksha yishami, you will go to moksha. If you go to moksha, doesn't matter what else you did, if you surrendered unto me, sarvapapebhyo, is it not, according to Bhakti Yoga, you should remember God at the time of death. You should put in the effort. Why think about God your whole life? The idea is to think of him your whole life as practice, and then Your practice makes perfect. At the time of death, you perfect that by remembering God at the time of death, and you go to God. That's the perfection of bhakti yoga. To always bhakti yoga, meditating on Krishna all the time, 24 hours a day. And finally, at the final moment of your life, you also think about Krishna and go to Krishna. That's perfection in bhakti yoga. So therefore, not doing that is the opposite of perfection. You might even say it's a sin. To not remember God at the time of death, to not remember God at any time is a sin. We should always remember God, always, right? We're completely subservient and dependent on him. We should always remember him, right? But we don't. We've forgotten him. So once we come back to remember him always, if we give it up again, that's a sin. So for a person who's a bhakti yogi, at the time of death, if he thinks about something else, that's a sin. It's like a sin. What does Krishna say in the Charma Sloka? I will remove all those sins. I will get rid of all the problems that occur from those sins, including the sin of not remembering me at the time of death. So if we only cherry pick this one verse and say we have to remember God at the time of death, right? We're forgetting that sarvadhamam parityajya mamekam sharanam bhaja aham tva sarva papebhyo moksha yishyami. Krishna already promised us, if we perform property, if we become prapanas, if we surrender to him, that we will negate that. That negates that. So Varaha Charma Sloka is not the main proof of that Antima Smriti is not necessary. Antima Smriti, remembering the Lord at the time of death, is not necessary, as proved in the Gita itself by 1866. The Charma Sloka of Lord Krishna himself proves this. But many people, if they read the Charma Sloka of Lord Krishna himself, they don't realize that means we don't have to remember the Lord at the time of death. So just to substantiate this, just to confirm this, right? Lord Varaha, we take from Varaha Purana and we say, look, in Varaha Purana, here's the confirmation. The real confirmation is the Krishna Charma Sloka. The Krishna Charma Sloka also doesn't specifically say that Antima Smriti is not necessary. It doesn't specifically say you only have to surrender once. That's why we need Rama Charma Sloka and Varaha Charma Sloka, because they specifically say things which are not specifically said in detail, literally in Krishna Charma Sloka. So if we really understand Krishna Charma Sloka, it includes Rama Charma Sloka and Varaha Charma Sloka. But since we misunderstand Krishna Charma Sloka, right? In order to bring out those other 2 points, these other 2 Charma Slokas are there as confirmation. But the real confirmation is right in front of us already in the Gita. So that's the thing. So we may meet people. We're going to meet people all the time, and they'll say, no, you have to remember God at the time of death. Otherwise, Arjuna asked the question: what happens to the person, the bhakti yogi, who doesn't finish up this lifetime? He somehow or other he did bhakti yoga his whole life. He surrendered to God. He's a bhakti yogi, but he didn't remember God at the time of death. So he didn't perfect his bhakti yoga. So he has to come back. And Arjuna asks the question, and Krishna says, no, he has to come back and he has to be born again. And he automatically takes off where he left off and gets born in a family of yogis or transcendentalists. And then he attains in the next life or maybe the next life. How many lives he has to do, but he has to perfect it. He has to remember God at the time of death. No, we don't agree. Krishna says in Charma Sloka, no. Says, you surrender unto me. All of this stuff is everything. Everything, any other thing, don't worry. Surrender to me and I'll take care of everything. No need to remember me. No need to chant my name. No need to worship me. No need to do any of this stuff. No need to bow down to me, right? In 1865, even up to 1865, right? The verse before the Charma Sloka, Krishna is saying, Manmanabhava Madbhakto, Majjaji Mamnamaskuru, Mame Vaishasi Satyam Teta, Patijane Piyosi Me. He said, if you want to come to me, think of me, always think of me. That means at the time of death. Bow down before me, worship me. He's saying, do all these things in 1865. The verse before 1866, he's still saying to Arjuna, do all these things. You got to do all these things. Right? But the Sri Vaishnavas, right? Of course, the northern school, they see 1865 and 1866 as going together. But the southern school, the Tengalai Sri Vaishnavas, sees 1866 as giving a complete separate way, property. Property is a separate upaya. It's a separate means. It's not bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga, yeah, you can do bhakti yoga, you have to remember God at the time of death. You have to bow down before the Lord. You have to worship the Lord. You have to always think of the Lord. That's bhakti yoga. 1865, up until the last sloka before, and then the next sloka, something completely different. And most Vaishnavas will reject that and say, how can it be completely different? But the Sri Vaishnavas have explained deeply how it is completely different. It is a different upaya. Property is a different upaya. No other. Everybody else says, no, property is an anga of bhakti. Atmani Vedana, I surrender my soul. That's part of Navada Bhakti. That's one of the 9 processes. That's surrender. Surrender can be there in Bhakti Yoga, but surrender, where we simply see the Lord as the only means, and not Shravanam, not Kirtanam, not Vishnu Smaranam, not Padasevanam, not Archanam, not Vandanam, not Dasyam, not Sakyam. Right? Only Sharnagati, only surrender, and only acceptance of the Lord as the only means. Right? That is property, and that is a separate way. That's a separate way, because in property you don't have to do Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Manas. You don't have to do those other things. You can do them. There's nothing wrong with doing them. They're wonderful things. We love doing them, right? But in case you don't do them, in case you don't do Vishnu Smaranam, what is Vishnu Smaranam? Remembering Lord Vishnu. On the time of death, I couldn't remember Vishnu. I remembered something else. Does it mean that I fail? I fail bhakti yoga, yes, but I don't fail property. The system of property is not dependent on that. It's not dependent on anything, because the system of property is accepting the Lord as the only means. So if the Lord himself is the means, then remembering him is not the means. Chanting his name is not the means. Worshipping his feet is not the means. Offering prayers is not the means. It's not the means. Whatever I do is not the means. Whatever he does is the means. That's it. So this is the difference between Bhagavad Gita all the way up to 1865 is explaining paths of effort, self-effort. Then the next sloka, the final order of the Lord, chapter 18, verse 66, is a different method. And Krishna says, okay, I told you to do all these other things, Arjuna. You're still doubting. So I'm going to give you another one, a different way of doing it. Just surrender unto me. That's all. Just surrender unto me. And how to surrender and what that entails is explained more in the Ramacharma Sloka and the Vrahacharma Sloka. And we need those because there are so many people who doubt that. There's so many people who doubt that. But if you don't doubt that, right? If you don't doubt that, then you can see that in the Krishna Sharma Sloka also. Atmani Vedana doesn't, yes, as you said, Atmani Vedana involves some aspect of ahankara. I surrender my soul to God. It's not mine to surrender. If I think that I have a soul, that I am the soul, that I am my own person, that I can do the surrender myself, if I can surrender something, it means I think I own it. If I have something and you say, give it to me, I have to think it's mine to give it to you. Otherwise I say, well, What do you mean give it to you? It's not mine. Right? If I think I'm giving it to somebody, it means I have to think it's mine first to give. How can I give the soul to God when the soul belongs to God? It's his property, right? So if I really understand, there's no giving involved. There's no offering involved. There's no surrender involved. There's just a realization of the actual fact that I am a slave of God, that I am the property of God, that I am completely dependent and subservient to God. Yeah, we are his property, and we have to realize that. And when we think even a little bit that we have an ego, that we are our own, that we're our own being, that we own ourselves, or we can control ourselves and everything like that, that's ego. That's egoism. What egoism is what separates us from God. Right? Give up all ego, and then we become God's property again, and he can do with it what he likes. So, okay, so Peravachan Pillai comments on this this passage, this Braha Charma Sloka we're talking about again. Vedanta Deshika quotes it in his Rahasya Trayasaram and gives an elaborate exegesis on the meaning in his Rahasya Shikamani. Though without referring to this passage as the Charma Sloka, he emphasizes the importance of the teaching in teaching property as an easy path to moksha, one which does not demand that one's final thoughts be on the Lord, as does Bhakti Yoga. Right, so I think that's very clear now. Though it's not clear how far the practice goes back, these days, both Tengalai and Wadagalai acharyas recognize 3 Charma slokas. So we're not sure when these other quotes from Ramayana and Varaparana became understood as also Charma slokas, but nowadays all Sri Vaishnavas accept all these 3 as Charma slokas, which are presented along with the Tira mantra and Dwaya mantra and the Guru Parampara to the Sri Vaishnava initiate in the Panchasamskara rite. Okay, that's what she says, but in actual fact, it's normally only the 3, Tira mantra, Dwaya mantra, and Krishna Charma sloka, which are given at Panchasamskara. The Rama and Vraha Charma slokas are not always given at Panchasamskara. They can be given at Panchasamskara, and it just depends on the acharya. But I've seen many Panchasamskaras where only those 3 are given and not the whole 5. Guru Parampara, of course, is given also at Panchasamskara. The explanation of the Vakya Parampara and the Sloka Parampara is given at Panchasamskara. Vakya Parampara means a recitation of the names of the different acharyas, going from your acharya back to Sriman Narayana, with simply the word Namaha afterwards. And the Sloka Parampara is the different Taniyans, the different pranam mantras for the different acharyas, starting with Sri Shailesha Dayapatram for Tengalais and Ramanuja Dayapatram for Wadagalais. As with the other mantras, the acceptance of these additional Charma slokas into the present position in Sri Vaishnava theology and liturgy seems to have been a long and gradual historical process. Though I know of no doctrinal text that has been written for the specific purpose of interpreting the meaning of all 3 Charma slokas, that may well be the next step in the creative, ongoing tradition of Rahasya commentary in Sri Vaishnava community. So I guess we'll pick it up again next week, and we'll start. And what we'll do is we're going to go through the book, and we'll also go through a very short commentary in English, which is on the internet on acharya.org by P.B. Anangacharya of Kanchipuram, who was a Tengalai. But he also appreciated Vedanta Deshika, so he gives some notes on the different sutras, the specific sutras, each sutra of Mumuksupadi.